Welcome back to the New Stack Agents Live, our live stream podcast about all things AI and agents. This is our fourth episode, and we picked a good one because our guest today is Paul Klein, the fourth. So did that on purpose. Founder.
I just want to add that my full name is Alexander Hazard Williams the fourth. So it's the fourth.
There we go. It's like a gamer tag. If your username's taken, you just got to add a number at the end, right? It's good SEO.
And I don't even have a middle name, so I feel left out here right now. Paul, you're the founder of Browserbase. I just thought it might be good for those who don't know, even though you just raised a 40 million Series B round just a few weeks ago. But for those who don't know, what does Browserbase do, just in a few words?
Yeah, happy to answer. Browserbase, we help AI agents interact with the internet. So we provide the browser tool, which is an important tool to let AI work on your behalf. When you think about all the work that you and I do every day, a lot of it happens on a browser interacting with websites on the internet. So if we want to have this future where AI is going to help work on our behalf, we have to give AI the tools to interact with the work we already do, and that is the web browser. So Browserbase provides browser infrastructure. We run many browsers in the cloud. We provide the tool layer, a framework called Stagehand. And then we also have an application that lets anybody try having AI automate a browser, which is called Director.ai. So we're really building the complete toolkit to automate the web and giving AI the tools it needs to interact and control websites via a web browser.
And when you started out, it's about a year and a half ago now, right? If I remember this correctly. Was that already the plan, or are you one of those companies that pivoted over the last few
No, it's
months
been
as
it's
agents
been the
became
same
popular?
plan since the beginning. And I actually started the company with a 3,000 word memo that I wrote in 2023, trying to talk myself out of starting a company. I'm a second time founder. And the first time was fun. The second time, you really got to make it happen. It's important to not be a third time founder in my eyes. So I really put a lot of thought into why is there a category defining opportunity to build a company in browser infrastructure? And my background has been working at category defining companies. I started at Twilio, a developer tools and infrastructure company for SMS and voice APIs, back during the IPO. And then I sold my last company to Mux. Mux is a video API company. And those companies are really important because they define their categories. And what's really compelling is that if you become a default in a category, you can help developers build much better software. So I really love thinking about how can I help power the future of software with primitives that power that software. And I've done that at Twilio, I've done that at Mux, and now with Browserbase, we're doing it again, but in a much newer category, which is this idea of the agentic browser, or a browser that can be controlled by AI.
Alex, I know you're interested in the history of headless browsers that have been around for a while, but why don't you take that from there?
Yeah, I'm so interested in the history of technologies that are behind AI and in the browserless narrative, so to speak. We see the emergence of, back in the early days, WebKit and the very early open source technologies for the browser, which led to Phantom JS. And that was really a pioneer of headless browser computing. Can you take us through the history of headless browser computing to where we are today and helping us think about how we may go forward?
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's one thing I know well, it's headless browsers. And maybe defining that term is important. It's one of the weirdest names in infrastructure. Our type of infrastructure is called a headless browser, like a headless horseman, right? It was a little silly. But we could even go all the way back to Netscape, right? The origin of the browser is so important. And what does a browser do? Well, it takes code and renders user interfaces, and then allows for people to interact with those user interfaces. And the browser really built the distribution engine on top of the internet to allow very useful software to have a universal interface where everybody can access software online using a browser and a set of standard programming languages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the most part. Now, as developers built more software that exists online, more websites and web applications, they needed a way to test those applications, because it turns out it's quite tedious after shipping a feature to go into your new feature on a website and click all the buttons 100 times, and to continue to do that every time you change a feature. So developers started thinking about ways that, okay, Now we have people using browsers, but for our software testing workflows, we need to have computers, or CI/CD, this kind of continuous integration, continuous delivery of software, needs to be able to test our software. So they created, well, let's make a browser that can be controlled by some code. And this code was very static. It was saying, go to this specific button, click this button. And it ran in a way where it was headless. Nobody needed to see this browser, so it kind of just ran in the command line. It still rendered all the UI elements. It still ran all the JavaScript, but it didn't actually show a display in a way that you would see, your normal browser. That's why it's headless. And these headless browsers were really useful for testing. And a ton of companies have built great, products around headless browser and simulation testing for websites. I was doing this in Jenkins way back in the day. We were running browsers in Jenkins with headless browsers with Phantom.js or Cypress. There's Browser Stack, a very large company, that does a lot of headless browsing for testing. Sauce Labs. Sauce Labs has done a ton of great stuff here. And there's always been innovation in the testing side, and several frameworks have come out to make it easier for developers to integrate browser control into their tests. Those frameworks are called Selenium, Puppeteer, and Playwright. Now, the important thing to note, they've always been built for testing. And this space has always been very testing oriented. Now, Browserbase isn't a testing company, foreshadowing here. And that's something that we thought about. Like, if browsers are useful for testing, why haven't they been used for more automation? And what has changed? So the world so far was mostly testing. Now what's changed? Well, it turns out to write tests, you need a human being to write code and maintain that code. And it makes sense for testing, because if the test breaks, you want to know. If the button changes color or changes text or changes location, your code breaks. These tests are tightly coupled to the interfaces that they're automating. But if you want to automate something on behalf of people, if you want to automate actual work, you need to have more durability. And the frameworks and companies that have existed so far, and the infrastructure has been really oriented around being quite brittle by design, so that if your website breaks, you know about it and can fix the website breaking. But if I'm building software that's automating work on behalf of a person, if the website changes, I still want my automation to continue working. And that's really introduced a lot of opportunity for building browser automation for the future, which is for actual automation of work, not for the existing world, which is mostly testing. And that's where Browserbase has come in. And our framework Stagehand, which really kind of is a superset of the existing frameworks, Puppeteer, Playwright, and Selenium, it's actually much more durable than those frameworks because it does a lot more fuzziness. And the kind of the advantage here is that it has an LLM functionality, an AI functionality built into the framework. In the old world, you can say, click the login button. It's the fifth button on the page. The color is red. It says login on it. In the new world, you can tell AI, hey, I want to click the login button. You figure that out for me. And if the login button changes color, maybe it changes position, maybe it changes from login to sign in, you can still find the button on the page using large language models. Large language models are very useful at parsing code. So as we think about what's possible now, we can now build much more dynamic functionality with headless browsers because we have LLMs that can on the fly figure out what the appropriate action is to take on the page. And that's really increased the size of this market. In the old world, if you wanted to automate 100 websites, you have to write 100 scripts. In the new world with AI, you can write one script that can control hundreds or thousands or millions of websites by using these low-level dynamic primitives where LLMs can look at a page and take that next intelligent action. And of course, with more automation, that means a demand for more browsers. That's why our infrastructure platform exists. We're here to help, cutting-edge startups power their web browsing capabilities of their AI agents or AI-powered software by being the infrastructure layer, the tool call layer, and then also an application layer for really building your first POC.
Let me, if you don't mind, Alex, let me just jump in there for 1 second in terms of how you're actually working with the browser, because there was a time where it felt like, okay, maybe we have to go into the DOM, right? Like really low level to interact with the browser. How are you doing that now? Are you using a real browser? Like, what does the headless browser actually look like for you?
Yeah, a headless browser is a real browser. So it's the same, we use Chromium, an open source browser. And you need a real browser because what is a browser? Well, a browser is a very sophisticated networking engine. It makes a lot of web requests. It's a very sophisticated rendering engine. It renders HTML and CSS into UIs. And it's also an interaction layer. When I click a button, it's a JavaScript runtime. So it's clicking a button triggers a JavaScript function on that page that's going to take some action. Maybe it makes a network request. Maybe it changes some state. It's almost like an IDE, or it's almost more like an OS, like a mini OS in its sandbox. So you still need a real browser. Now you could just make a curl request or a web request to a page and get the HTML contents and parse it. But a few things happen there. One, rendering the page, rendering the UI is actually quite helpful for some types of pages where vision language models, VLMs, will need to actually, see what's on the page to make the right interaction. Secondly, like if you're just getting the HTML, if you just download the HTML and say, tell an LLM, click this button. Well, if you're running that locally, if you click a button, it's not going to do anything, right? You have to actually have the button make some actions, right? Upload the form. You have to interact with web application. It becomes very challenging for you to really build dynamic actual browser automation in isolation. And that means that, with Browserbase, when you're running a headless browser, you don't really have to think about setting up the browser infrastructure, what type of browser you're using. You just know that you have control of a browser and you can interact with the buttons on the page using, languages and frameworks that are very familiar to the developer.
If you're, who do you think of you as who's your user? Is it the agent? Is it the developer? Because you say you're not a testing company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who is the user you're thinking of when you're talking about that here?
So a lot of our customers are, large or promising AI companies and startups that are building these features that are going to go act on your behalf. One example of this is Clay. Clay's one of our customers, and we've been very happy to work with them and help power some of the web browsing capabilities that make Clay great for helping people go do research on, hey, who should I sell to? Or what are the types of companies in this space? So we think about like research, we think about workflow automation, and sometimes we think about just random browser tasks, file download, PDF retrieval. I talked to a company where a lot of their job is having a human being log into a portal, download an invoice in one place, log into a separate portal, then upload the invoice there. They do that thousands of times a week. And they're looking for a way to automate that. In Browserbase, plus, our frameworks and other, large language models all come together to let regular people build automations. We do sell to developers. So we're helping people build software. We're not, a automation company. In fact, there are several automation companies built on top of Browserbase offering more point and click solutions. For us, we really want to help power this next generation of builders. And in 2025, everyone is a developer these days. With LLMs, anyone can write software, right? And that's created a boon for vibe coders who are using primitives to build personalized software that helps them get things done. And we've seen quite a lot of this, and that's why we launched Director.ai, because Director.ai helps vibe coders understand how to use Browserbase better. There was a week or two where I kept getting people, dentists were booking calls, telling us about some of the pains they have with, insurance prior authorization, going to insurance portal and like prior authorizing things. And they were like, well, I do this all the time manually. I know how to use Cursor. I'm trying to put together some software here. How can I use Browserbase to help me automate this painful thing that I have to do every single day? And I think that's quite compelling because in the era of vibe coders aren't generating infrastructure. They're generating business logic and piecing together tools to make that work really well. And Browserbase is the best browser tool for AI applications. So we slot in quite nicely to somebody who is building some sort of net new software that uses an LLM to agentically accomplish some task, whether that task is on a web browser or maybe in some combination of web browser plus offline access.
So what's your differentiator?
Well, there's a lot of things. First of all, I think there's no true moats until you're quite a large company. So execution is definitely key, right? We're a year and a half old. So if I told you there was any like real, strong moat, some network effect that's at play, I think I'd just be dishonest, right? But when you move fast and you build great software, you actually get a lot of different things that come to you. First of all, Browserbase is a great brand. People do trust and have heard about Browserbase overall. And the reason why is like we really just take care of our customers. You look at our customers on social media, they're constantly raving about the product that we have and the team that we built. I don't know the last time I said I love anything that I pay money for. I don't think I've ever said I love, American Express. But people are on Twitter saying they love Browserbase. That feeling of love comes from a lot of care and attention that we give to our customers because it's challenging to build on the frontier. It's challenging to build new software. And having not only someone who's going to help be a primitive that powers your application, but also an advocate and an advisor and someone who will answer your questions about which model to use, we really try and be our customer supporter. And that's because due to the nature of our business, we're a usage-based revenue business. That means we only win when our customers win. So our whole incentive, my goal as founder, is if a founder starts working with Browserbase, how can I help their company be more successful so that we can grow with them and they can become a very large company one day? So that's maybe more of the fluffier stuff. There's a few more of the technical ones we can get
I was
into.
curious. I was curious. I'm sorry, Frederick.
Yeah,
I'll let you
that's
go
good.
after this. I was just curious about how is, like, for instance, stagehand a differentiator?
Yeah. Well, I think differentiators happen in a few different degrees, right? I do think at the core of our business, the way we build our company, in the age of AI, people are your biggest differentiator, and Browserbase has just one of the most fantastic teams I've ever worked with. But of course, that's not just the one differentiator we have. Our infrastructure platform, one of the things that is important is when you're building your own browser infrastructure, you really want to have observability over what's happening. You want to know what's happening when your agent goes to a web page. We bundle browser recordings and logging so that if your agent's going off the rails, you're going to be able to see exactly what happened, triage it, and understand what you have to correct in your application. You need to know what your AI is going to do when it has control of the web browser. We make it really easy to see that. And then stagehand's a really incredible thing because it's model agnostic. It's an open source framework. So if anything, anyone can use it, right? It's quite nice. You can integrate it quite easily to your software, and you get to bring your own models. We are not tied to any model provider. And this is quite helpful for our customers because when the newest model comes out, they want to switch over to it and try it out. Well, thankfully in Stagehand, we have first-party support for any model. So you can bring your own model and not be tied to any sort of model provider or even some sort of cloud host provider. You can use Stagehand on your own and hopefully use Browserbase with it. And of course, that observability story does tie into Stagehand. When you use Stagehand with Browserbase, we have a lot of first-party Stagehand observability to see exactly the prompts that you issued, the responses, the latency, the token costs. So we really make it easy for everyone to build reliable production web automation agents. And the Browserbase stack kind of works really nicely together to layer things on top of each other.
Since we're talking about differentiation and competition to some degree as well, I mean, we picked a good day today because today AWS launched Agent Core, Bedrock Agent Core, and part of that is a browser tool and that AI agents can use. Now, you had a bit of a tweet out today, Paul, where you talked about meeting with AWS. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the most hyper competitive era of software, of startups really, that I've ever seen in my entire life. And when you think about competition, I think it's important that competition is one with integrity. And what I heard, when I got feedback from with this tweet where, we were proposed a partnership meeting, and in the end, it really just seemed like a way to try and get more information about the product they're building. It left a bad taste in my mouth. And many other founders have been DMing me about similar tactics that have happened with large companies trying to use their innovation as a startup to further their own products. But in the end, we're not worried about it. With the product they launched, it's lacking a lot of things that make Browserbase great. Specifically, it's very much coupled to the model Nova Act, which really isn't there. It's not as reliable as any of the other models we've seen in our evals. There's no public benchmarks available for Nova Act, and that's really because it isn't that great yet. So for Browserbase, we try and be cloud agnostic. We try and be infrastructure agnostic and provider agnostic because we really want to be Switzerland. And the thing that makes Browserbase great is that I can go work with the Cloudflares or the Casadas or the GCPs of the world because I'm Browserbase and I'm an expert in one specific thing. And if browser automation workflows are mission critical to a company, using Browserbase is the bet you'll make where you're going to get the fullest attention. So overall, I was a little disappointed to see some of the behavior here from AWS, but it's par for the course. It's not illegal. It's certainly not illegal to try and get a meeting and ask people about their product. And in the end, I told them the same things I'm telling you now. The thing that makes Browserbase great is our community of developers who love us, the people who contribute to Stagehand, and our complete obsession with building this next category defining company that's going to allow all types of AI to go out and automate the web.
I want to ask, though, what are those meetings like? Like, or even why did you accept that meeting, knowing that that is sometimes what can happen?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know it was going to be that type of meeting. When the context
You think they were acquiring you?
No, I try and build partnerships. Browserbase is a partnerships company at its core. It's very important that we work with many different companies to enable great things to happen. If you look at our documentation, we have great partnerships with all sorts of interesting AI companies, integrations into LangChain or Llama Index, for example. We work with our investor. One of our investors is Okta or WorkOS or Clerk or Stitch. Right, we work with authentication companies all the time. So I take a lot of these partnership meetings. It was the first time in a meeting that it kind of like eerily reminded me of a scene from Silicon Valley where I think it was in the comments here, where the scene is the Pied Piper folks, which is the startup in Silicon Valley, get pulled into a meeting, and all of a sudden this meeting is a lot more people than you expected. And there's a whiteboard, and they're asking you to write down how your architecture works, or tell us exactly how the technology works, and those meetings aren't set up for building trust. And with everything we do with Browserbase, I'm a very straightforward, authentic person. Um, it did kind of turn into a world where I felt like, oh, this might not be the type of meeting that it's going to be, and we might need to think about a way to excuse ourselves and probably politely say this isn't the best thing for us to talk about. So all in all, I think that this is something that happens in the Valley. Paul Graham has a great essay saying, don't talk to corp dev. I think it really summarizes this thing super well, and it's common. And the reason I addressed it yesterday was, one, I think it's important that we talk about products that are come out. People are going to ask, well, what's the difference between Browserbase's browser infrastructure and AWS Agent Core's browser tool? And I think the thing, first of all, you'll get from us is we have this observability functionality. We have Stagehand. We have Director. You have the full suite of tools. And secondly, you can trust us. We're not going to schedule a partnership meeting and launch a competing product. We're going to build alongside you. And every customer that uses Browserbase is extremely important to us at this stage. So you get that attention. You get that customer care that is really obsessive. And I have customers who worked with us, who I've helped them ship the product. I've given them advice on marketing. And that customer obsession really is a core part of what we do here at Browserbase. And we try and live those values in the way that we operate with our vendors, our partners, and working directly with our customers every single day.
Talk to me a little bit more about what those customers are doing. You kind of mentioned the example of the dentist earlier on, for example, but what are the kind of those canonical use cases right now, and what's next? Because it feels like it's really early on still in this evolution.
It's really early on, and what's so interesting about our customer base is how broad and wide all the different use cases are. Because the browser really interacts with everything. We have so many different customers doing different things, but I'll pick a couple that I find are quite interesting to me. One of them is this company called Benny, and what Benny does is if you're getting food stamps or EBT or SNAP in a certain state, you can get rebates on those food stamps. And what they do is they have a great consumer app where you can take a picture of your receipt from using your food stamp, and Benny will use a browser powered by Browserbase to gently go submit that food stamp for your rebate that you're owed. Submitting that rebate is very painful. It's many different steps, and people who are going through this, they have a lot of stuff on their plate. They probably don't want to go get their 25-cent or a couple dollar rebate. But Benny makes that super easy, and it takes this pain point that's relevant to certain people, creates a software around it, and then uses Browserbase to power the agentic browsing behind the scenes that's actually helping people save time. We've estimated that we've saved millions of hours for people, helping Benny deliver that product. And it's not just consumer. When you're trying to do procurement, if you want to order 1,000 screws, you're going to have to go to several different vendor websites, evaluate the different options, get quotes, add those quotes together, make a decision on where to buy, and then submit the order. This is several time-consuming steps that people take. Or maybe in compliance, when somebody signs up on your website, if you're a bank, you need to go make sure, if they're a business, their website has a terms of service with an address on it that matches the address they use in the bank application. You need to make sure that this could be a trusted person that should have a bank account. That's all done by a human analyst, a compliance analyst. But when you give AI a browser and reasoning and a prompt, it can go help do compliance and know your customer KYC on your behalf. So it's just a sampling of use cases. But if you think about a consumer company versus procurement versus compliance, these are very different spaces. And I'd say the number one thing we have to do at Browserbase is help people be inspired and think about ways they can automate the web. And maybe I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
How often did you buy something online today?
Just one thing. Well, yesterday I bought two things, but
Okay.
That was not in the browser. It was on mobile, actually.
That's fine. Well, that's powered probably by Stripe, a $96 billion business, right?
Yeah.
How many text messages did you get from a business today? Maybe like a 2FA or like a marketing message?
0, because I always say no to those. But
Okay.
I know where you're getting at. Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's
sure.
totally right. $16 billion business.
Yeah, totally.
And the last thing is, how often did you use your browser for work today? Maybe going to a website, reading some information.
You don't want to know. Right?
A lot, right?
Totally.
That's the market that we're playing in, right? It's a very,
totally.
very large market. And it's a market our customers are playing in. There's so much that can be automated online, and we're really excited to help power the rails to help companies build the next billion-dollar companies. We want the next billion-dollar companies to be built on Browserbase, and we're going to do everything we can to do right by those customers and make sure they have a great experience.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment, though. And one way I've been thinking about this is this to some degree a stopgap measure right now, where over time we'll have the APIs, we'll have different ways for agents to interact with the web.
Yeah, I'll kind of use another analogy. I'm in San Francisco. I took a Waymo to work today, and you think about AI driving cars, it's kind of like AI driving a browser. Now, the ideal solution probably is that Waymo should have their own lane. They should be able to drive as fast as they want, but that would require rebuilding all of this infrastructure and probably retraining how society works around handling cars, right? Instead, Waymo has learned how to drive among people, and it does a pretty good job, right? We don't have to rebuild the infrastructure of the internet to help AI use the internet. We actually can use we can teach AI to use the internet the same way we do. And I think about, I don't think websites are going to go away. I don't think we're going to rebuild the web, because it's going to take generational change for people to stop using the internet. If anything, AI is going to get so good at browsing the web that we're going to be the slow ones. And websites might be needed as just like a human accessibility feature, because AI is doing most of the browsing for us. And if you're old school, you're using a browser the old fashioned way. I kind of think about how, will I teach my kid to drive a car one day? I don't know. Will my kid be like, you still use Facebook in a browser? That's so old school, It's going to take, 16 years at least before any of this changes. And I think if Browserbase is still around in 16 years, we'll have built a really fantastic business along the way, and certainly be doing more than probably just browsing.
And Alex has returned. For those who are watching us on the live stream and the video, he was gone for a little while, but here he is.
Yeah, I lost my camera there. Paul, I'm not sure if you guys covered the discussion about LLMs and their influence on you. And I'm curious about that, about how influence comes in this new world for a technologist like yourself, and how the LLMs have influenced your work and your thoughts.
Let me reframe that. In terms of, do I use LLMs to think about strategy for Browserbase, or how does the
How's it
progress
changed your
model?
thoughts about being a developer? How's it, altered your perspectives about the work that you do? How has it changed your thoughts about society? There's so many elements to that question, but I'm curious from someone who's developing the technology firsthand about that role that LMs play in your life and in your work.
Yeah, I'd say that I take the stance that really I see people operating with much more leverage. It's pretty cool. I don't imagine that there's going to be this doom loop that people are afraid of. I'm excited to automate the boring things I don't want to do, the tedious browsing that I want to do, and then keep me doing the fun browsing. I kind of like to shop for sneakers. I don't want AI to shop for my sneakers. I want AI to file my Delaware franchise tax. That does not give me joy, right? And I look at a lot of the things that AI is automating, and you always will have a choice. You always will have a choice whether AI will want to automate this for you. And if you can do it better than any sort of model can, there's a lot of value in that. I don't use AI to write very many posts of mine at all, because I actually think I really care about my tone of writing. And when I think about, will AI impact the future of how people work? I certainly think it will. But I believe it's going to impact the future of work in a way that will let people do more of the things they care about and do less of the things they don't care about. I think that's this beautiful future that can happen with AI. I don't like to drive. I really enjoy just taking a Waymo and being on my phone in the back. That's way safer for the rest of the world than being on your phone while driving. And I get to kind of spend my time doing the thing I want to do, which is writing pretty funny tweets on Twitter, right? So this future to me is a future of much more leverage, where humans are having the power to supervise many AI agents, and agents are able to do as much as you can, but it's still going to require the creative energy that a person like you and I can bring to really accomplish that really good work.
Why can't the LLM just do what you're doing?
Like right now, like on this podcast?
Browserless computing and browser-based technologies. Why can't the LLM just end up being the one that does all the work that you're doing with your browser-based?
Yeah, good question. You're asking, why can't LLM just generate all the headless browser infrastructure
Yeah.
for a customer, and then maintain that, and then also build the partnerships with third parties, and also come up with new ideas to power those features? It's a lot of work. And if you're building something mission critical, at this point, I haven't seen a model that can really build a whole infrastructure company. It took us, team of 30 humans, like a year and a half to get to where we are now. I don't know how many GPUs that would be, but I think it's going to be a ways off before an LLM can fully replace Browserbase in standing up and maintaining and operating, a headless browser infrastructure stack at scale. Now, I think if you want an LLM to build you a POC, I think that's totally possible. And I'd encourage people to use that. Use an LLM to stand up your own version of Browserbase. I'll tell you how. Get Chromium, get Chromium trying to running on a server somewhere. As soon as you do that, you're going to realize that it's probably not going to be Amazon Lambdas because they're very resource constrained. So you have to go use Kubernetes. Okay, now you have a browser running in Kubernetes. How do you scale that Kubernetes cluster? How are you going to do network isolation? My Claude code has a lot of trouble just fixing the bug. I don't know if it's ready for stateful distributed systems at scale. I think at one point it will be better for that. But what's kind of interesting is a lot of our customers at Browserbase are actually people who have built this on their own organically with humans, and they switched to Browserbase because maintaining it, improving it, and continue to innovate on that stack, on this piece of the critical infrastructure, is actually very time consuming. It's not their subject matter expertise to be browser experts. That's us. And maybe when AGI is here, a lot of the world will change, but I think we have some time. And at least right now, we're delivering a lot of value to our customers. And I think we'll keep doing that for quite some time as well.
Let me ask you that question maybe from a different direction, because one thing we've been seeing too is kind of browsers with built-in agents now, right? Like, how do you think of them? We've got, I think Perplexity is coming out soon with the Cosmos, I think, and there's Opera and others. OpenAI is rumored to do something similar. Like, how do you think of them in that ecosystem?
Well, we certainly don't view them as competitors at all. We actually, Perplexity is one of our customers. Josh Miller from Browser Company was in our replies yesterday on the Amazon tweet. We are very supportive of the local browsing, the local agentic browsing initiatives. And where we come in and where we hope to partner with a lot of these companies is what happens if my local browser is running, doing a task for me, for a consumer, and I close my laptop, or I or my internet goes out, or I want something to happen while I'm sleeping. You need something running outside of your device, running on a cloud, on a server that's always running. And Browserbase is really building the best browser infrastructure for those server-side background agents that are going to go out and automate the web on your behalf. So we think that there's a great parallel here where you can have your consumer local browser experience happening, but then as soon as you need it to happen regularly on a schedule where you're not going to be guaranteed to be at your laptop or connected to the internet, your background browser, your background agent can go ahead and take care of that task for you. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to power that. But in the end, those consumer browsers are just one use case. We're helping people build software. And sometimes to our customer's user, they don't even know that they're interacting with the browser behind the scenes. They are just clicking more powerful buttons. And I think the future of software isn't actually you're thinking about browsers at all. You're thinking about more powerful buttons. When I say submit my taxes, it's not going to give me a PDF I print out and I have to go file somewhere else. It's just going to go to the website and do it for me. When I say I want to adopt the dog and I can go ahead and click the dog adoption form, fill it out for me with my information, send me an email about where I pick up my dog, right? A lot of this stuff is just going to happen behind more powerful buttons, not necessarily chat interfaces. And this is just much more powerful software that's going to come to market.
And we see that all the time now, right? I mean, I don't see the save button very much anymore, Yeah. I mean, it's basically gone away.
Yeah, auto-saving is a thing, right? It's just the technology is pushing us more towards more powerful buttons. I think the chat interface inside of every app is probably not what's going to happen. But as people are building more sophisticated software, I think you'll actually see hyper-specialization of software, where there's going to be the Harvey.ai, AI legal company, but for like farmers in Iowa dealing with, workers' comp, right? Like super specific startups. This becomes easier to build companies. Your edges is how tailored can you make your experience, right? And I think there's going to be so much software that's about to be built. And that software needs a bridge to the legacy internet. The internet that's already going to exist, the internet that's everywhere, the internet that's international, by the way. A lot of our customers exist in many other countries outside the United States that have a much less sophisticated web application experience. And Browserbase is that bridge from AI agents to the legacy internet. And it's something that's going to continue to exist for a long time. And it's not a glorious business. I kind of feel like I'm on Dirty Jobs sometimes, if you guys remember that show. I'm dealing with old PHP websites or things that still use Flash or
that's the best business. I mean, that stuff will be there. That stuff will be there forever.
Yeah.
So writing some cobalt right there. But do you think of, because you do have a bit of a consumer facing application now too with director.ai, AI. Is that kind of part of that bridge between, the developer, consumer, kind of where does that fit in?
Yeah, it feels very consumery, and I think that's because we've realized that's the pattern that many people are familiar with. But no, Director.ai, which is our application for allowing you to prototype an AI agent controlling a browser using our framework stagehand and our browser-based infrastructure beneath it. The reason we built it is, once again, it's for people to prototype. But in the end, the goal of Director is your output is software that's going to automate work for many people, or for people, including yourself and others. It's not the interface you go to every day to automate your task. It's not going to do that for you. A consumer agentic browser might be the better solution for you there. But if your goal is to create software that's solving a problem for others, that's interacting with websites on other people's behalf, Director is an amazing place to start. Director is a software builder inspired by Lovable, vZero, Bolt.new. Those are the products that have really enabled many more people to build software than they can before. Director is that same type of paradigm, but really focused on helping people build software that's automating website work on behalf of others.
Where do you rank developer experience, in your work as a priority, but also a complexity?
I think great abstractions are extremely important. And I have a story about developer experience. I think it's kind of fun. When's the last time you bought a jacket? Yeah, either of you guys.
Last year.
Last year.
Winter.
When you went to buy that jacket, did you go to the jacket store and you just kind of look at the jacket on the rack and say, it's got sleeves, it's red, it's got pockets, it's a medium. All right, I'll buy it. No, you try on the jacket. You got to know how it feels. You have to put your arms in the sleeves and make sure it fits well. You're walking around a little bit with it, right?
Well, that's the way I did it before I got married.
Yeah, now maybe not as funny. But that jacket buying experience, the trying on the developer tool, is the same thing our customers do when they use Stagehand, our browser automation framework. We have a great experience where you can go NPX if you're using Node, NPX create browser app.
Yeah.
And what that does is it provisions a simple quick start experience right in your in your IDE. Set up with Cursor or Claude Code, so you can code gen if you want. But we want to try and accelerate the time to someone trying out this product, understanding the ergonomics and making sure it's for them. So developer experience really is the most important qualification or conversion step in our customer's journey.
Yeah.
And I personally measure what's our time from sign up to first API request as a key indicator of success of our developer experience. We want to make that as fast as possible. You need to escape from the browser into the IDE. That's super important for our business. And I think a lot about how our onboarding journey is like, how our documentation, our CLIs really all kind of bring that together to give our customers the best developer experience.
Let me ask you about the open source piece as well, because one question I often have is, where do you draw the line between what's open source for you and where does the enterprise product start?
Interesting.
I think I draw the line in the way that makes most sense to me, which is that Stagehand is open source because it's a framework. It's something that you can use and you can run it with your own local browsers or Browserbase. But the value that we've based our whole business around is the value of the duration of the browser or the network bandwidth it's consuming. Those are our two, SKUs that we sell, our two pricing models is browser minutes and, network gigabytes. So with that in mind, if I want to increase the number of browser minutes that are run on Browserbase or increase the number of network gigabytes transferred through Browserbase, what can I do? Well, I can unlock new market. I can reduce the friction to automating the web, which is why we built Director and Stagehand to address two friction points we've seen with our customers. And I don't think, Stagehand on its own right needs to be something that I charge money for, because in the end, if I'm enabling more developers to automate the web and we're building the best browser infrastructure out there, especially one that works best with Stagehand, that is our opportunity to create value from that kind of that framework. So I don't think it makes sense to open source Browserbase, the infrastructure company, frankly, because it's not that, valuable in the infra itself. If you have the infra, if I open source Browserbase, I gave it to somebody, the value we create is maintaining Browserbase, scaling it, proactively improving it, navigating all the threats that can happen. We're operating browsers on behalf of customers or AI. A browser can go to any website. We have to be very careful with what we do, and we have a lot of interesting virtualization technology we use to secure the browser. the team watching over this infrastructure day and night gives teams that are larger and smaller peace of mind that they can trust that Browserbase has that browser infrastructure completely handled. And that's something that's much more valuable than any sort of code. It is the ownership and trust that people put in us when putting mission critical functionality on top of our infrastructure. And we deliver that every single day by acting as a sophisticated infrastructure company that's going to operate our browsers reliably and performantly for every customer.
Can you get a little bit into the technical infrastructure? What is the underlying technology that you've developed? I mean, I'm curious if what programming language you're using for that foundational technology, why you're using TypeScript, for instance.
Do you work at AWS?
No,
Just
I
have
do
to double
not. They're a
check.
sponsor, but I do not.
There we
work
go.
at AWS.
Well, I'll share it with the pod. Let's talk about our technology, right? So Browserbase, we run Chromium as our core browser. We only support Chromium. We think it's the right browser for automating the web. On top of that, we use a virtualization technology called Firecracker.
I use
Firecracker is
Firecracker because Firecracker has a very interesting history with browserless headless computing, headless browsers.
Yeah, virtualization is very challenging, right? Because not only like the browser itself is a bit of a virtual machine, right? It does a lot of isolation tasks. And the thing about the browser and Firecracker, and we use Go as a programming language, we use Node.js, a few other things. But I'd say the most interesting problem here is that the browser itself was not designed to run on a server. Headless has always kind of been a hack. It's always been like a side thing for the Chromium team. And there really hasn't been much innovation on improving the browser to perform better in a headless environment. Once again, you think about the browser that you and I use every day, it's probably the most resource intensive application on our devices. It certainly is a thing that I'm running into the most when I feel like my Mac is slow. I have too many Chrome tabs open, right? And doing a lot of interesting work to customize Chromium, customize our browsers, and then customize the infrastructure around it to get the most performance out of our browser infrastructure has really been something that we spend a bunch of mental calories on. And that kind of, those optimizations have been like subtle, but also really meaningful. And frankly, when you're running a browser in a server environment, you just run into a lot of weird edge cases. Like you got to have support for emojis. You need to have support for certain codecs. You have to compile the browser differently. You need to make sure that when you're running it in the right way, that you're setting the time zones appropriately based on where the user is actually located. Because if your browser's running in US East 1, but your user is in the West Coast, you need to make sure the time zone represents where they're at. Or if you have a browser that's running in one place, but the customer is in Germany, and you have to set the right locale so the page renders in the right language. These are all these little gotchas you experience along the way when trying to run browsers at scale. And there's just so many little edge cases that I personally experienced having worked in this headless browser space across 2-3 companies now for the last 5 years. So it's a labor of love. And as you continue to kind of once again, if you built this on your own, please send me an email how it goes, because I've built it on my own before and I really didn't like it. I'd rather spend my time building a great company, finding product market fit, than becoming a headless browser expert, because that's probably what made my last startup not work out as well as it should have. So
let me ask you maybe a final question here. You mentioned security there for a moment. I was thinking, what is it that you do to make sure that those agents that are running, behind an LLM that could be doing weird things, buying a jacket for Alex or something like that, how do you make sure that doesn't happen, that they stay inside of those guardrails?
Yeah, so we really have to start with observability. It's on our customers to help determine the guardrails of what is appropriate for their agent to do or not. Because we're a platform, I can't necessarily say that for all customers. But when we think about this, we're often identifying, hey, is a browser going to a known malware site, and flagging that for our teams internally. We want to make sure that we have good, safe practices for our browsers overall. They're all, of course, completely sandbox isolated. We don't share any hardware across browsers, nor do we reuse any browsers. They're all destroyed after being used. But for our customers, the way that we can help them actually steer their agents appropriately is by giving them best-in-class observability, a full session replay where they can watch exactly what happened, log lines around what actions were taken in the browser, network requests. They can see what network requests were made from each page. Being able to analyze that is extremely helpful for ensuring your agent is doing exactly what you want it to do, which is important in this age of non-deterministic agentic software. With Stagehand, our framework, what we really think about is how do we make this a little more deterministic? And that means isolating the LLM calls into single atomic steps. Instead of telling your agent, go buy me a jacket and letting it run loose, you tell it, go to this specific vendor, find a jacket like this, and buy it with these credentials, assuming that it's no less than this price. And you break it up. When you have one prompt that controls a browser and just kind of is in a while loop, you're going to have non-determinism. When you have several atomic steps that are verifiable, cacheable, and explicit, you have a much more reliable browsing experience.
That's interesting.
One thing I was thinking too, and that maybe to wrap it up, but as I'm surfing the web, it's getting harder and harder to surf the web to some degree. There's pop-ups for GDPR and cookies and sign-up sheets and all kinds of paywall blocks. How do you handle that? Like, do you run ad block on the Headless browser?
There's an option to turn on ad blocking if you want to, right? Or cookie consent pop-ups, but generally, I think that agents are quite good at navigating ad blocks or pop-ups or any of that stuff. It's actually quite easy. Where they have trouble is actually when there's a lot of information and things that aren't necessarily in the DOM and the HTML. If you have a very image-heavy website, using a vision language model, a VLM, is very important because you're going to want to be able to see what's in that image. If someone is presenting, I've seen this happen on some of our customers' sites, they go to a place to buy something and all of the product information is in an image. Very hard for an LLM to parse an image, right? So you have to use a combination of vision plus text-based models to really be able to automate the web reliably. And I think one thing we aspire to do with Stagehand is that you won't have to think about that when you use our browser framework. We'll let you provide multiple models and we'll pick the best model that works well for the page that you're automating. A developer shouldn't have to think of all these tricks. They should have a browser tool they integrate like Browserbase and Stagehand that just works well for their agent, and they can focus more on their agent reasoning logic, which is really the proprietary IP that's important to their business.
Awesome. Alex, any final question from you?
I'm just so fascinated. I'm just so fascinated by, what we're talking about. I guess my last question I just was curious about is like, are you seeing the need for different browser-based versions for humans and agents? Or is it all in one kind of thing?
Yeah, we're really focused on helping developers build software. So for us, like with Browserbase, we focus on helping them. I think you may be asking, like, are we seeing the need for
do the agents have different needs, and are there different use cases for the agents versus the human behavior that has their own particular needs and use cases?
Yeah, in the end, the models are trained on what's called a web trajectory sometimes, which is a representation of human thought process or browsing process. So I think you find that with prompting, they're acting as close to humans can. And I don't think you have to rebuild the web for agents or people. You just have to build it for people, and the agents are going to act like people most of the time.
So just last question, where do we go from here? What's on your trajectory? What's on your horizon?
Yeah. So for us, we just raised our Series B. We're growing the company. We're now over 1,000 customers across the world, but we're a team of 30 here in San Francisco. So we're looking to find the next great engineers who really want to build a category-defining company in infrastructure. Our website is browserbase.com. You should try Stagehand, which is stagehand.dev. And if you want to get started with anything, director.ai is very fun to play with. And what we've seen is when you show it to anybody, they'll kind of get what we do after playing with director.ai. So I'd encourage people to check out, some of the stuff we're working on. In terms of what's next for us, well, we just have a lot more work to do. We're just getting started. It's just day one. And I think in a year from now, if we came back to this podcast, it's going to be really exciting to see how the models have progressed, how agents have gotten more reliable, and how Browserbase is an even bigger company than it was now. And I think there's a lot of cool software still to be built.
Awesome. Well, last question. No, I'm just kidding. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. And we'll be back next week at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, not at 11 a.m. Pacific, but at 1 p.m. Pacific with Fel AI and actually one of your investors, Paul, Glenn Solomon from Notable. So we'll be back next week. Thank you all.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Frederick.